So that's the formalities done. As I said, we'll do Q&A at the end. I'll now call upon the Minister for Energy, Bill Johnston, to the stage. He'll deliver the opening address and then hand to Kate Ryan. So welcome, Bill.
Well, thanks, Jai. I appreciate the opportunity to come and join this great crowd here this morning. And I want to also begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional lands of the Noongar people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge the Honourable Brad Pettit, who's here today listening to this important event, and I'm glad that one Member of Parliament is as excited about the energy transformation as I am. I want to begin by acknowledging the work that Kate Ryan and her team at Energy Policy WA has done over the last 2 years. It's been a wonderful transformation from the PUO to Energy Policy WA, and every time I visit I do find the staff excited and engaged about the work that needs to be done here in Western Australia. I also want to thank the Energy Transformation Task Force members that worked so hard over the last 2 years to put together the various reports and recommendations that have come out of that process. So Steve Edwell, the Independent Chair, Michael Court, the Deputy Under-Treasurer, Kate Ryan as the Coordinator of Energy, Brett Sadler, the Director from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and Katie McKenzie, who was at that time my Principal Policy Advisor for Energy. You know, we all know that the energy system is transforming. The influx of solar panels is changing everything that we do in the energy system. We have to make sure that the system takes account of the new dynamics that are happening in the system. You know, we've got 1 megawatt a week of new rooftop solar going into the system. It's just unbelievable to see the fact that last year the installation of rooftop solar accelerated despite or perhaps because of COVID. The Transformation Task Force was set up after AEMO tabled their report that was said that if we didn't do anything here in Western Australia, we'd have blackouts by 2022. And as I always say, if the lights go out, it's the minister's fault. So I wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to happen. So the task force has now completed its term and provided its final report to government. And Energy Policy WA is now tasked with implementing the recommendations and continuing the reform progress. And to support that, the McGowan government is committing $14.2 million in the upcoming state budget for Energy Policy WA. That's to make sure they have the resources that they need to continue the hard work that has been laid out by the Energy Transformation Task Force. Before Kate Ryan comes up and reflects on the important work that Energy Policy WA is doing to continue that important work, I just want to remind you of what we've done. So the DER roadmap is the first of its kind, and it's receiving a lot of acknowledgement from around the country and from internationally. What the heart of the DER roadmap is to make sure that rooftop solar can play its proper role in the system and not be an add-on to the system. And if you look at what we're doing out of the roadmap, we're trialling community batteries. We've got tariff trials in operation, which encourage the use of electricity during the day so that there's more efficient use of the energy system. We've got new technology pilots, including the upcoming virtual power plant trial in Project Symphony, but also SESH, the Social Energy, Smart Energy for Social Housing project, and the Schools Virtual Power Plant project. We've released the Whole of System Plan, which finally brings together all the different elements of the system level planning for the South West Interconnected System for the next 20 years. We've amended the market rules to make it clearer and easier for new technologies like battery storage to participate in the power system and provide energy capacity as well as essential system services. And I want to acknowledge the decision of Synergy to build a big battery down in Kwinana, which we look forward to them making final investment decision on quite soon. There's a lot of work that's gone into that, and I want to thank Steve Edwell in particular for his leadership and support, as well as Kate Ryan and Jay for their work within the agency. But I'm also very pleased at the level of engagement we've had within industry. We understand, I've always said that the transformation isn't a destination, it's a journey, and I understand that that transformation is continuing. And we look forward to continuing engaging with the sector to make sure that we can have practical changes here in Western Australia, and we won't have get bogged down in the debates about politics, but rather concentrate on the changes that we need to have. I'm also pleased to see that we're bringing reform to the Pilbara as well, with the new NUIS regulation starting from the 1st of July this year. And I'm sure the two competitors will be fighting very hard. We're rolling out standalone power systems. We've changed the Act here in Western Australia so that we can roll those out. And we do think that standalone power systems are going to play a major role in our power system in the Southwest Interconnected System, as well as in the North. We've committed to, the state government during the election campaign, committed to installing another 1,000 systems over the next 5 years, which will improve the reliability of power for those customers, reduce bushfire risk, and also be delivered at a lower cost than traditional generation and connection alternatives. We've also supported consumer representation, and I'm pleased to confirm that this support will continue with further funding in the budget for the Western Australian Advocacy for Consumers of Energy program. Last year, the government also released our climate policy, and the policy underscores our commitment to working with all sectors of the economy to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And transition of the energy system is going to create lots of opportunities for new technologies, and the real trick is to make sure that we have a strong position in those new technologies. And that's why next week I'll be going to Onslow to visit the microgrid, a globally significant technology achievement. And I'm pleased to say that recently it went for 80 minutes at 100% renewable. We tried that once before and it took us 8 hours to get the system back on operating. It's also important to remember that Western Australia is unique in that half of the electricity used in the state is not transmitted across a grid, but rather is on-site power. And so we're seeing a lot of new innovative activity in the off-grid space. Just as some examples, Gold Road Resources Solar Energy Hub is a 187 kilowatt hour PV and a 408 kilowatt hour lithium energy storage hub. And this is quite important because it's actually not at a mine site, it's at an exploration camp, and the entire project is redeployable. So it's really quite important initiative because it demonstrates that that renewables are now a redeployable alternative, and so you can get a better match in the investment horizon between a mine with a short mine life compared to a renewable energy project which generally has a longer investment horizon. And right next door at the Gruyere Gold Project, a joint venture between Gold Road and Goldfields, they're installing additional gas engine to complement a 13 megawatt solar farm and a 4.4 megawatt hour battery. And of course, at not far away from them at Agnew, Goldfields and its technology partner EDL have the first large-scale renewable energy grid at a mine site that includes wind turbines, which is reducing their carbon emissions by 70%. So there's a lot of opportunity here in Western Australia, and we know that the technology companies here in Western Australia are at the leading edge of providing solutions to the globe, and I want to make sure that we continue to leverage that knowledge and understanding to make it a stronger industry here in Western Australia. So we all know that integrating renewables into the existing systems is not easy, but we are determined to do that here in Western Australia. And I want to acknowledge the work of Energy Policy WA, Australian Energy Market Operator and Western Power in making sure that we've got a system that's fit for purpose, that we're continually providing opportunities for investment. And I was very pleased recently to be up at Yandon with the opening of that wind farm, Western Australia's largest. It's an exciting time to be in the energy sector. After 100 years, 150 years, where it was a pretty simple business, you build a big power station, a lot of wires, and take the complaints from the customers when they ring you back, to now being much more dynamic, much more bi-directional, much more innovation, and it's an exciting time. I'm always very pleased to be involved, and so I look forward to listening to Kate Ryan's report, and then I want to hear what the industry's got to say. Thank you all very much.
Interesting spot. Thanks very much, Minister. Can I just echo Jai and the Minister's sentiments also and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I'd like to add my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you all for attending today. It's really exciting to have an in-person event again and a fabulous turnout. We really do appreciate you taking the time. Sorry, I'm trying to look at a couple of things at once here. All right. It's my job now to tell you a little bit about what's coming up in the energy transformation strategy. So, as the Minister said, it really is an exciting time to be in the sector. We are moving towards a brighter energy future here in WA. WA is unique. We've got fabulous renewable resources in the form of wind and solar. And we also are, isolated, but therefore in control of our own destiny. And that gives us the ability to just get on with managing the transition that's happening in our power sector. Managed well, renewable energy can be efficient and affordable, and it really presents exciting economic opportunities for Western Australia. And we've seen lots of interest from the private sector as well as government businesses investing in this clean energy future. Where are we up to? Slides are going quicker than me. Ooh. We've got to where we are today, and the Minister's highlighted some of the recent growth in renewable energy, the change in our power system. This is all driven by customers, changing technologies, changing customer demands, and collectively customers and the energy sector have invested in this changing power system and have taken us at a pretty rapid pace to a relatively high level of renewable energy penetration. I don't know that it gets the coverage that it deserves in WA, but we have had pretty phenomenal uptake in renewable energy in the last couple of years. We've seen a 50% increase in solar PV off what was already pretty record uptake. We've seen about 144% increase in our large-scale renewables here in the Swiss, and of course the off-grid projects that the Minister mentioned and many others around the state. It's pretty exciting, and that we've got to points in time where the power system in the Swiss has been supplied by almost 80% renewable energy. If that had happened in the NEM, it probably would have made the front page of the paper. It's gone slightly less noticed here in WA. The change is happening at pace. As the Minister's touched on, we've delivered a pretty substantial program of work already under the Energy Transformation Strategy, and this just highlights the core deliverables of the Energy Transformation Task Force. We've produced the first whole of system plan, bringing together for the first time, in a long time at least, the optimal mix of large-scale network investment and generation investment and storage investment in our main grid here in the southwest. We've delivered the DER roadmap with 36 actions to help us effectively integrate distributed energy resources into our power system. And there's been a very substantial change to our wholesale electricity market framework to allow for new technologies like storage to play a role in the market, modernise our essential system services framework and introduce a security constrained economic dispatch. That's all pretty exciting stuff and very foundational to the work that we need to continue on with in the coming years. This clicker doesn't like me. There we go. Touched on some of the recent growth in renewables. The whole of system plan indicates that this is just the start and that we are well and truly on track to see a high penetration of low emissions energy in our main power grid. So under all 4 scenarios modelled in the whole of system plan, we see upwards of 70% renewables by 2040 in our main grid. And that is without including any explicit carbon policy direction. So this is about economics and the power system. And we're getting there pretty rapidly. We are continuing to invest and evolve, and we know it's quite likely that the change we see over the coming 2 decades will exceed this outlook. But as you all know, challenges remain. The beautiful Madagarut Bridge, which is a lovely approximation of what we like to call our duck curve here in Western Australia. The Madagarut Bridge. For the last couple of decades, peak demand has been a really big challenge in power systems around the world, but in Australia particularly. Peak demand is still a challenge we need to deal with. However, we've got a new one now, and that's system low, which is occurring on mild, sunny days, often in the shoulder seasons, where PV output is really high and customer demand on the low side. The AEMO report from March, I think it was, well, certainly early 2019, indicated that without action, it's possible that that low demand would lead to an unstable power system somewhere in the range of sort of 2022 to 2024. Now, we have already, through the Energy Transformation Task Force, taken a range of actions to mitigate and manage that potential future. However, we've had increasing uptake of solar PV in the meantime, which I think has exceeded everyone's expectations. And so this challenge remains. And we need to continue to manage these challenges so that we can enable the uptake of renewable energy technologies and other technologies that customers are demanding. We have a pretty good idea of where we want to head, and this is really all driven by what customers and the community are expecting. We need to have a future power system that continues to meet the needs of different customers, be them residential customers, off-grid mines, industrial customers in main grids. They all have needs, and we need to be able to invest in the power system to meet those needs, but also achieve, as always, the objectives of a secure, reliable, affordable and increasingly low emissions power supply. And we're doing this all centred around, as I'm sort of saying a few times here, the needs of customers. The long-term interests of consumers is really what's driving our thinking and the future that we're trying to create here. So, the main game that I'm here to tell you about today is our upcoming work in the Energy Transformation Strategy. The Energy Transformation Task Force concluded in May, but as we know, the transition in the power sector is continuing, and so the Energy Transformation Strategy is moving now into its next stage of work. This again is all about excuse me, delivering on the long-term interests of consumers, and there are 4 themes of work in the next stage of the Energy Transformation Strategy, which I'll walk through now. Sorry, excuse me. I might be strolling through at this rate. Oh, don't go too, thank you. So a really obvious one, we need to implement the work that the Energy Transformation Task Force has commenced. And so we are starting work shortly on the next whole of system plan, hoping to release that in late 2023. We now have a requirement in the wholesale electricity market rules to do a whole of system plan at least once every 5 years. But while the transition in the power sector is as rapid as it has been, we anticipate doing them more frequently than that. So we're getting cracking on the next one. It will importantly include the government's net zero by 2050 aspiration. The state climate policy makes it clear that the WASP will now include that in its modelling. So we'll be updating the assumptions and the modelling for that. And of course, we're also looking at other updated assumptions. Have the costs of different technologies changed? We're now seeing some really exciting new demand prospects, be that for green hydrogen, green aluminium, other large green energy consuming demand sources. We need to start to think about how we factor those into our scenarios moving forward as well. And increasingly get further into the distribution network, which I guess one of the fortunate things of modelling this for the southwest as opposed to the whole of the NEM is we can get into that lower level of detail where quite frankly a lot of the action is happening in the power system. We need to continue to deliver the 36 actions in the Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap. They roll out to 2024. A key one I think I'll highlight, and it's been mentioned already, is Project Symphony, which is really a very important kind of landmark virtual power plant trial here in Western Australia. We're going to be looking from customer, technical and market perspectives at how we effectively integrate and aggregate customer devices in our power system. And that's going to inform how we design the framework for the future. And we need to implement our new wholesale electricity market and access arrangements, which are going to enable those new technologies, particularly storage, to play an active role in all parts of our wholesale market, going to uplift our essential system services framework and introduce a security-constrained economic dispatch. It's a pretty substantial modernisation of our wholesale electricity market and system operation arrangements. At the absolute heart of the energy transformation strategy is the integration of new technologies. This is really, there we go. The slides don't know that this is really important. This is what we're really trying to do with all of this work, is enable the transition that's underway, enable customers to install the kinds of equipment that they wish, and to harness that as far as we can for the good of the individual as well as the power system as a whole. We are hoping to release an EV action plan in coming months. This is really adding more detail to the EV actions in the Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap. It's about preparing the network and the system for the integration of EVs. We don't know exactly when they're coming, but we know they're coming, and so this is all about being ready for them. Tariffs, which can be the elephant in the room. The Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap did highlight that our current flat residential tariffs are not compatible with the high DER future. The Minister's mentioned that we've got tariff trials underway. We've got a second one we hope to start later this year, which is a sort of a mobile phone style tariff for residential customers. We're going to learn from those and over the longer term identify options for tariffs. The Swiss modular grid, many of you will have heard the stat before, more than or around half of the Western Power's poles and wires serve about 3% of its customers. The opportunities to supply to some of those fringe of grid customers in a more reliable, cost-effective and safer way through things like standalone power systems is now a reality. And so we've moved from trials into implementation of standalone power systems. We now move with Western Power to planning the next phase of that transition to the modular grid, which is really looking at the role that microgrids can play in those fringe of grid communities and towns. So that's a piece of work which will progress over a number of years as the opportunities are now emerging for those fringe of grid microgrids. As part of the WA Jobs Plan, Energy Policy WA will be establishing an energy industry development team. This is a small group of people to support the off-grid mining sector in its transition to low emissions energy in partnership with local suppliers and manufacturers of energy technologies. So we're really excited. We're establishing that team at the moment and really excited to be playing a role there in supporting and accelerating that transition. We're seeing some really exciting and innovative work already happening in that space, and we're hoping to be able to give that a nudge along by supporting both the mining sector and local suppliers. And finally, this next stage of the energy transformation strategy continues some of the things that have been a feature of the first stage, and indeed before that. We will continue to roll out advanced metering infrastructure, which is an essential component of harnessing sort of consumer appliances. We'll also keep going with innovative trials. The Minister's mentioned a few. One of the ones that I like to reflect on, and we're going up to have a look next week, is the Cutting Edge Onslow microgrid project. Western Australia really is at the forefront of the global energy transition, and there's some really exciting projects going on right across the state to work out how we do run a power system on renewable energies. This next one, if I can get to it, is hopefully reasonably self-explanatory as to why we need to do it. We are looking forward to a low emissions energy future, but we do need to manage it in a way that keeps the power system secure and stable and keeps the lights on. So we are continuing to plan for the orderly transition from coal-fired power as a key source of energy on our grid. We've got the upcoming retirements of the Muja C power station units, which were announced for 2022 and 2024, so that's coming upon us. And through exercises like the whole of system plan and other analysis, government will continue to explore the right time for the transition out of other coal-fired power stations over time. We know that the financial viability of some of these older thermal technologies is really struggling as the power system transitions, and this, as it always has been, is about balancing the need to transition over time to a low emissions grid with also the need to keep the power system secure and to support the workers and the affected community. So that work, which is happening across government, this is just a part of. The next one there is the one I always struggle to describe. The power system continues to change rapidly. This is really an ongoing work stream, but it's so important that we've highlighted it as part of the energy transformation strategy. There's a lot of work underway with AEMO, Western Power and ourselves in particular to keep understanding how the power system is changing and make sure that we've got the tools in place to manage and mitigate any emerging risks to the power system. So this stream of work will identify whether we need to accelerate some of the reforms we're doing, and in fact we've just done that in bringing forward the implementation of updated inverter standards here in Western Australia for solar PV, with the new AS 4777 coming into place already just in the last month or so here, ahead of the full national rollout in December. And that's because, as we've mentioned, every day we are seeing so much solar PV go on roofs. This just gives us probably another 100 megawatts ahead of time of PV that will not trip off through a power system disturbance, and that's really important. And there will be other things like that might emerge, the need for a new essential system service. This is a piece of work that will help us identify that so we can get on with implementing it. And finally, the reserve capacity mechanism. We are big fans of our reserve capacity mechanism. It's not going anywhere. And indeed, around the world, markets are moving more to capacity mechanisms of different forms. Even the NEM is inching towards something like that. This is about, I guess, checking that the different aspects of the reserve capacity mechanism still work for our changing power system. So are we planning for the right contingencies in our reserve capacity target? Are we accurately estimating the contribution to reliability of different technology types? So it's really having a look at the different components to make sure that each of those continues to work in our changing power system. That's a priority piece of work. We'll kick that off later this year, and we anticipate having some discussions with the Market Advisory Committee fairly soon on the scope of that one. And this is the one that I get excited about, though you might forgive me for that. It's a touch on the dry side, but really important that we keep the regulatory framework up to date so that we can keep evolving in line with what's happening in the power system. So most of what I've talked about today is about the South West Interconnected System. It's not entirely, but that is obviously a focus. And one of the reasons why that's a focus is not only because it's our biggest power system with most of the population attached to it, it's also the one with the most regulation. And so it has the most work to do kind of from a government perspective to keep it up to date. As we've known since we kicked off the transformation strategy in 2019, this was never going to be the end of it. And so what this work is about is putting in place governance arrangements for the sector that can enable it to evolve much more readily into the future. On 1 July, some changes to our governance frameworks took effect, with the Coordinator of Energy, my role becoming responsible for market development and rulemaking in the wholesale electricity market and gas information services. Those changes reintroduce a market development role, an active market development role, which had been missing for the last few years. And they also really importantly elevate the role of some of our advisory committees, the Market Advisory Committee and the Gas Advisory Board, to provide advice on the evolution and the development of our market. So we see those as really important changes, and we'd like to build on those through a package of legislation in this term of government, obviously subject to government priorities. That will do a number of things, but importantly, we're looking to consolidate the codes and rules that are all made, particularly under the Electricity Industry Act, to create a common change framework and allow those instruments to evolve together, which they haven't done historically. We're looking at the implementation of our alternative electricity services framework. So this is something that wasn't formally part of the first stage of the energy transformation strategy, but we kicked off around the same time, or in fact probably slightly before, and it's also something that was recommended in one way or another through the microgrids inquiry. So this is about creating a fit-for-purpose regulatory framework that works for some of our new and emerging business models in the energy space, which recognises that a full-blown retail licence can be too heavy-handed, but exemptions aren't sufficient. We need something in the middle. This is the framework that will provide for that. and allow us to establish codes of conduct, binding codes of conduct for different kinds of businesses as it becomes clear there's a need to. So we're already in the drafting phase for that piece of work. We're also looking through this to enable the end-to-end power system security and reliability framework that the task force has recommended. And we'll address some things like some legacy and out-of-date parts of our regulatory framework, like some of the voltage specification in our 1945 Electricity Act, which, surprise, surprise, doesn't quite work anymore. The other one that I've mentioned there, which is a slightly longer term delivery, is to have a good look at our access framework. So the access framework hasn't been reviewed in light of the changing power system and in light of the changing role of the distribution system with high levels of DER. So once the current AA5 process is substantially complete, we'll kick off a review ahead of AA6 to have a look and see whether we need to make any changes to that access framework so it continues to deliver in enabling high levels of DER, enabling the integration of new large-scale technologies, and otherwise meeting the needs of a modern third-party access regime. And yeah, old technology. We're really keen to do this with you. And there's lots of ways to play a part in our next stage of energy transformation strategy work. The Minister's already highlighted the really important engagement we've had so far, and we've really appreciated that, and we're looking forward to that continuing. Across the industry, there are many ways to drive outcomes in our sector. I mean, you'll do that directly through investment and innovation, and there are some really exciting investments and innovations going on across both the government businesses and the private sector. There's plenty of opportunity to influence and inform our policy and our market design. Through groups like the Market Advisory Committee, we'll continue with the Transformation Design and Operations Working Group, which was established to progress the task force agenda, so that will continue to complete that piece of work. And quite importantly, as the Minister's highlighted, we'll continue with our WA Advocates for Consumers of Energy program, WA ACE, a little less of a mouthful. And quite importantly, we've established an expert consumer panel where interested and obviously committed individuals are participating in some of the more technical aspects of our regulatory reforms. And so members of the panel will participate on the Market Advisory Committee and Gas Advisory Board and make submissions into some of our more technical and complicated processes. And so we're really looking forward to continuing to enhance how we take into account the consumer side of all of this through the WA ACE program and other mechanisms. And so it really is a very exciting time to be part of the energy sector. The team at Energy Policy WA is thrilled to be leading the next stage of the energy transformation strategy work. This is really important work. It's also very rewarding, notwithstanding its challenges. I've covered the next stage of the energy transformation strategy at a very quickly, I guess. However, in the next few days, we will publish a short document which outlines not just what's coming up, but importantly what we've achieved to date, so you can have a look in a more comprehensive way at the progress made under the first stage of the energy transformation strategy and a summary of what's coming up next. So keep an eye out in your inboxes for an email from us with a link to that, and if you're not already on our mailing list, please do get in touch so we can share that and other information with you. In wrapping up, it would be remiss of me not to highlight that the energy transformation strategy is just one of several related policies, initiatives and strategies across government. And so we are working really closely with other parts of government in the delivery of all of these. The energy transformation strategy enables these, and equally they feed into our transformation strategy. And so we are working very closely. I haven't covered all of our work program today. This is just another element of it across government in the delivery of all of these integrated and related pieces of really important work. So thank you very much. Apologies for the pausing slide presentation. I'll now hand back to Jai, and the Minister and I look forward to your questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kate. I'll ask Kate and the Minister to take a seat on the podium here. I'll let Kate grab her breath quickly. I'll do a shameless plug for the energy.wa.gov.au website. That's where you sign up for our mailing list. and get all the information on events like this, as well as upcoming consultations and events that we are holding. There's also the Energy in WA conference that was rescheduled from May that's being held next week. So if you haven't already signed up for that, do have a look at that. So we have the Minister and Kate ready for questions. We've got Keely and Christina roving with microphones. So I'll ask you to just put your hand up. When you do ask a question, it would be great to, I guess, provide your name and the organisation that you're representing. I know there'll be heaps of questions, so we'll try and move it through pretty quickly. So Keely's at the back, Christina's on that side, and I'm looking for first question. Bit of an auction going on over there on the right, Keely. Excellent. We've got one microphone between Kate and Bill here, so I'll just direct it as necessary.
Steve Davison, as an independent, Jai, thank you for the seminar this morning. Now, Kate, if I may ask one question with two components. When the wholesale electricity market rules were being reworked, was it done on the basis of reviewing what exists already in the Hawaiian network? Secondly, when the modelling was done, was there a systematic review exploring the lowest cost option? So that's Hawaiian and lowest cost.
I can have a go at shouting, but that might be better. I will have a system plan. The system plan modelling absolutely does attempt to estimate the least cost overall mix of different large-scale technologies to meet the needs of the power system and consumers going forward. So, yep, very systematic, least cost is, and but meeting power system security requirements and things like that.
Thanks, Stephen. In the COVID era, most meetings feature the phrase, "Can you hear me okay?" So we'll just keep working on that. Looking for the next question. Christina, you want to test your microphone as we get a hand?
Testing.
Yep, all good. Looking for one over this corner, down here. Christina.
Hi, Tim Edwards from Metro Power. Look, we help manage about 500 megawatt of existing loads and generations for industry on the Swiss. These are the guys that are keeping lights on now, not the ones, or possibly the ones in the future. They're also the guys that have been operating this and keeping jobs through COVID. Now, the policies changes needed, and I agree with the change to energy future, and our customers do as well. The policy change group is quite well funded, thanks Minister, and you've just announced another $14.2 million for the policy group in the coming year, which is a good amount of funding for resources and capacity to change rules and to move towards this future. The problem is that a certain number of these rules are approved and gazetted and implemented, and we're only just now part of the WEM Reform Implementation Group working with all these customers. So we've got, somewhat over $30 million of funding to consider and make rule changes for the future. Yet industry are now committed to comply with new rules in a very short period of time without any funding to do so. They're now facing new constraints with being able to get power, being able to supply power to the grid. They're now going to have to pay, on top of their normal bills, costs for the energy coordinators fees. And as far as generator performance standards go, somehow generator performance standards were made mandatory for market participants ahead of the Western Power technical rules that are meant to deal with things like generator performance standards. Now, the cost of that generator performance standard implementation for market participants is enormous. And we're only just working out the scale of that cost. And yet there doesn't appear to be any industry support to cover those changes. They all want to change, but at the moment, it's an enormous sum that everyone is worried about.
I'm not quite sure what the question is, but look, in terms of the generator performance standards, generators have always had obligations. The problem is that there's never been enforcement. So I'm not quite sure what the question was, but I assume what you're asking is how come we change the rules about generator performance standards on relatively short notice?
Can I ask the question?
Well, if you ask a question,
the question is, will industry be supported to be able to comply with these fast requirement changes?
Okay, so let me make it clear that generator performance standards have always been there. The problem is there's never been an enforcement structure. So what we've done is make the generator performance standards mandatory, which is hardly a surprise because you get paid the capacity payments. It's not acceptable for government for us to pay the capacity payments and then not have the generators perform when required. It's pretty fundamental. So yes, you are paid. You've been paid enormous amounts of money for a long period of time. If you don't want to connect to the network, don't. But if you connect to the network, then you're going to have to meet the obligations of connecting. You know, that's the purpose of the capacity market, so that when we need capacity, it's available. And January last year, and look, there were a lot, there were a lot of blames, a lot of people to blame for the Uffles event, and some of those, Western Power had to accept its share, and the interaction between the GIA and the AEMO's work was not properly examined. But there were 13 generators that didn't perform on the day, and so 140,000 people were without electricity because none of those had to be without electricity had those generators performed as required. Now, that is not a new obligation. That's about enforcing the existing obligation. So, yes, we are going to pay you. We pay you, what is it, $132,000 a megawatt capacity. And we've been doing it since 2005. So, absolutely, I look forward to you meeting the obligations that we're paying you to meet.
Okay, next question. Liz at the back there, you've got a loud voice, jump up. Yeah.
So Project Symphony will be announced in detail very soon. As people may be aware, that it's being financed partly by the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth's had a negotiation process with the state government entities and AEMO that are involved in that project. And when the Commonwealth government's ready to make an announcement, the state government will stand with the Commonwealth government to make that announcement.
I guess I'll just add to that. Project Symphony was outlined in the DER roadmap as our critical pilot as we glide towards building the power system around consumer devices. And so the outputs and the interactions within Project Symphony are critically important. Things like the AEMO market rules, the testing procedures, the interactions with AEMO IT systems. And so Project Symphony we view as being that test bed. And so we're very much looking at it as something that will allow for many different parties to interact with as we get ready for the concept of aggregated consumer devices across a range of portfolios being major participants in the power system. Okay, next question. Ian, you've got a loud voice too, so I'll ask you to speak up, introduce yourself.
First question relates to the massive blowout in gas consumption for all four phases of the WASP, largely caused by an over-reliance on solar, caused by a lack of investment in wind, caused by a lack of investment in transmission infrastructure. Minister, you have said publicly that you do not see any need for generation or transmission investment out to 2030. If that's been the case, why did you in your election promises put out a $10 million fund for local manufacture of wind turbine blades, of which is desperately needed on this list because the blowout of residential solar has left a huge gap in the need for the present 1,000 circa megawatt of wind capacity. Really is needing to be more than double from anywhere near equilibrium for the power system.
The $10 million fund in the election campaign wasn't just for the manufacture of wind turbines. It's also aimed at other elements of the wind infrastructure. One of those would, of course, be the towers, because we actually think that's probably the easiest pathway into the sector, because the technology that's used to build the towers is an existing technology here in Western Australia that it's compatible with other existing engineering businesses. So that $10 million is designed to encourage the manufacturing of components using common infrastructure. So you might have one contractor using the facility once and then a different contractor using it subsequently, because you might not have the same contractor winning the deal for the wind installations. Look, the whole system plan is a model generated outcome. And so it's not like, I'm not quite, perhaps if you just go and read the WASP, it explains that it was a model of various scenarios. It's not like the government said, this is the outcome we want. It's the other way around. It's the components, the inputs drive the output. And so what that modelling says is that it's cheaper to build additional wind generators in the south rather than in the north. It's not saying that you don't need additional wind. In fact, all the scenarios show that additional wind will go into the Swiss. But what the modelling shows is that it's cheaper for electricity when you build it in the south, because then you don't need to build renewable energy zones, which would push up the cost of delivered electricity. In respect of the expectation of the government is that if the hydrogen industry takes off in the way that we hope and expect, and we're trying to support it, that actually there'll be more wind generation built outside the existing Swiss than inside the existing Swiss. So our expectation is that there'll be, just gigawatts of wind turbines installed in Western Australia, and what our policy is both the little bit that gets built in the Swiss and the massive bit that gets built for export hydrogen. Some of that manufacturing is done here in Western Australia, and that's what the election commitment was about, making sure that we're ready to take that massive opportunity and get the engineering and the construction done here, not just the installations.
Well, what about the plan for no investment in transmission, which will be required?
No.
The additional wind is required in the system.
No. Have a look at the whole system plan. What it shows is that you can install the wind that's needed without building additional infrastructure, transmission infrastructure. But the whole system plan actually shows that there has to be additional infrastructure built. But it doesn't say don't build any. It says don't do it in a way that's inefficient. And it's more efficient and therefore lower cost to build, to the extent that there needs to be additional wind in the Swiss, build that in the south, not the north. Because if you build it in the north, you'll have to upgrade the transmission infrastructure. If you build it in the south, as the coal units shut, the existing transmission infrastructure can then be used by the wind farms. It's a lower cost. It's not about no wind or yes wind, no wind. It's about, yes, we're going to have additional wind, but build it where it's cheapest, which seems to me to be a patently sensible outcome.
Okay, looking for the next question, and I might build a round of redundancy into this as well. So, Zoran, if you're up next, Keely, you want to try the microphone, and then
Testing.
Yep, and then Steve Gates after that. Zoran, just there.
Okay. Hello, Zoran Božić, retired engineer. I wish to commend the minister for the enrollment or for the giving more say to consumers. But I don't think that is enough. Because in respect to our previous question, no one is preventing gentleman to build his own transmission line and get compensation from future users who are coming to connect to that part of the system. And I believe that there should be workaround in the regulatory regime to compensate him for all that future users compensate him for that particular transmission line. As a retired poor guy, I'm concerned with the price of electricity. So I will judge your work. Is my bill going up or not? So that is my simple criteria. In that respect, I believe that there are many sieves in the rushed reform process that we have been doing, which could be efficiently sealed by allowing individuals, you may restrict it to chartered professional engineers if you wish so, to challenge some of the regulatory decisions. And if the challenge is successful, to be awarded by, say, 2% of the overall cost saved. That is a small cost for enormous savings. And I can tell you why this is necessary, because just the documents that Kate presented have over 2,000 pages together. Who has in their own time to read that large quantity without in his own spare time? So there must be some incentive for chartered professional engineers who know what's going on and who realize, because these lobbyists are doing what they want. We can integrate everything, but the question is who will pay for it? And all lobbyists want that me, as a retired engineer, pay for their connections. I don't want to do that. So if there is a bad decision made that could be improved, why don't change the legislation to allow individuals to challenge decisions and, if successful, to earn 2% of the money saved? Thank you.
Thanks, Zoran. So I think the question is really about power prices going forward, as well as representation on consultation and reviews of the rules. So I think, Minister, you'll have some views on that, but Kate, I think you can also offer up some.
Look, can I just offer a bit more information about our WA ACE program, which is something that's continuing to evolve, and so we are always looking for ways to get better consumer representation into our really quite complex consultations. You're absolutely right. A feature of the current arrangements is that we are remunerating participants. So we have a forum which is already meeting, which tends to be at a higher level, but allows us to get a really broad spectrum of consumer input into some of our policy work. Recognising that those participants find it hard to get involved in some of those really technical aspects, we've recently established through a competitive process our expert consumer panel. Again, through the funding that the Minister mentioned earlier, the government will be remunerating those individuals for their participation. So this will continue to evolve, but that's the stage we're at the moment. I would point out there are some avenues for reviews of different aspects of the regulatory decision-making framework, and I'm not sure we're looking to any fundamental changes of those at the moment. I'll let the Minister make some comments about electricity prices, which I assure you we're all keen to keep as low as possible.
Look, yes, I think you're right that you should judge the performance of the system by the price of power. Remembering that a small system is always going to be more expensive than a large system because you've got less of power to share the costs over, and AEMO. I don't want to be seen to be criticising any individual market participant, but it's just a reality. If you've got a smaller system, then your marginal costs are going to be higher. Having said that, we've got cheaper electricity prices than Victoria and South Australia, about the same as New South Wales. We're slightly more than Tasmania. Tasmania is a tiny system with connected to the NEM, so they've got a lot of advantages. So internationally, we're about a third lower cost of A1 tariff is about 1/3 less than the price of electricity in Germany, and it's lower. The 28 cents for the A1 tariff is lower than every Western European country. So if you look at the EU, there are some Eastern European countries that are cheaper than us, but all the Western European countries part of the EU, we're cheaper. So it's nobody wants to pay their power bill. I don't, but it's fair and reasonable, the home tariff, and we all know many people will understand the future of the Western Power structured pricing, and there is an expectation that Western Power will have a less revenue in the future than they do at present, and what that means for electricity prices will be an interesting question.
Thanks, Minister. We'll move on to Steve. While we're waiting for Steve, I'll look for the question beyond Steve. Okay, at the back there. Christina will bring you the microphone around.
Hi, Steve Gates with Sustainable Energy Now. We're an NGO. Kate, as you rightly mentioned, the electricity transformation to renewables is part of the climate policy of WA, but one of the things that's not mentioned or seems to be missing out of the climate policy is the mention of gas. And I think part that the electricity system can play is enticing the use of gas to be switched to using electricity, so all electric appliances and things like that. Is there something that, this is either for Bill or for you, Kate, that the government can do to help transition and sell the benefits of transitioning from gas to all electric appliances to the general public? And it also, as I understand from the reports that have been done, is a cost savings to people in terms of gas costs and a reduction in requirement for gas utilities in new developments. Excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, look, this is a genuine issue, but you should think about this, that of the total volume of gas extracted in Western Australia, 70% is exported, 30% is used domestically. Of the 30% used domestically, 4% is used in people's homes. So that's just over 1% of the total volume of methane extracted in Western Australia and offshore is used in people's homes. So even if you got people tomorrow to stop using gas and use electricity, it makes almost no difference to the total volume of gas used in Western Australia. So, the current discussion about moving to a 10% blend for hydrogen in the distribution network, I'm not opposed to that. I'm not trying to make out that that's not a good idea, but I'm just making the point that that would be 0.1% of the total volume of natural gas produced onshore and offshore in Western Australia. So that most of the gas produced in Western Australia is industrial, either, industrial making electricity or for industrial purposes domestically, or exported to our partners. In respect to the 70% that's exported to our partners, they all have their own commitments to Paris. And so their purchase of our exported LNG is done in the context of their obligations to meet their Paris Accord outcomes. So take China, for example, which is increasingly buying LNG from Australia and has direct investment in a number of Australian LNG projects. That means they are able to do that additional gas demand, notwithstanding their commitment to zero carbon by 2060. So it's actually important to think about what use our gas goes to. So if you're going to have a big impact on the amount of gas used in Western Australia, it's not going to be on home switching from gas to electric, although that's perhaps a good idea. It's actually going to be about replacing gas demand with other products. So that's why if you look in the mining sector, which is obviously the largest user of gas in Western Australia, you see all the major companies have their own plan to reduce their gas consumption. And, you know, just look at what I mentioned there about the Agnew project by Goldfields, a 70% reduction in carbon emissions through their project. So the biggest achievements are going to happen in that off-grid space. Guess what? Kate's now got a little unit to work with the large off-grid demand to get them to look for alternative supply options in the renewable space. So you see, it's like, you know, the government's identified the real problems, and then we're trying to fix the real problems. So that's the way we're trying to get about this thing.
Excellent. Okay, question at the back there, and then beyond that, I might just ask you to hand the microphone to the lady in front of you after.
Craig Hosking, ex-Sequa, Western Power, Verve, Synergy. I've retired. So I was having a look at the regulations, and I can't remember what they're called, but anyway, the regulations that that the ERA used to determine the Western Power tariffs. And I noticed that, obviously to do with the energy transformation, that they're now required to look at the, I guess, supporting renewables. But one thing that's come out of it is the requirement to not cross-subsidise, in that there used to be a requirement for them to look at upstream and downstream suppliers and to not provide that cross-subsidy. So the basic problem is that the existing Western Power tariff has a fixed charge which is probably half what it should be, and the variable rate is probably double what it should be. And with the renewable requirement, you're actually able to allow that cross-subsidy, to allow an individual without solar to effectively cross-subsidise someone with solar, because the fixed charge is too high and the variable charge is too low. What are your comments?
The ERA doesn't regulate the A1 tariff, if that's what you're referring to. No,
but it regulates the Western Power tariff, which then Synergy then uses.
Yeah, but there is no question. I mean, everybody knows that there's a misalignment between the A1 tariff and the cost structure. But that's got nothing to do with the ERA, because the A1 tariff is set by government, and it's not set by the ERA. It's a government decision, and it's a recommendation of the DR roadmap that we explore alternative pricing structures. And there's two, leave aside what Horizon's doing, there are two models being tested already, and Kate, I think, or Jai, I can't remember, outlined that there's another one going to be tested as well. This is a politically fraught question, because I try and be a minister that's got a bit of bravery.
I know.
And but I'm nervous to say that there will be further reform. The A1 tariff is important to many people, and whatever transition on costs need to be done mindful of the needs, particularly of low-income earners. Can I tell you that when I was Shadow Minister and Nahan was the Minister, I thought he was going to reform the tariff structure, and I wanted to give him enough space to do it. So whenever I was asked about it, I used to say the same thing. I used to always say exactly the same thing. I said, I'm not opposed to tariff reform so long as it looks after low-income earners, because I was trying to give him enough space that if he wanted to do it, he could get away with it. I didn't want to just be in opposition, but I'm not quite sure the current opposition has the same generous spirit. So this is a live question.
Yeah.
There is a misalignment between the A1 tariff and the Synergy's cost structure. Have a look at, please, have a look at the budget papers. There are now subsidies tied to the non-economic activities of Synergy. We no longer just give them a lick of money and say go for it. We now only subsidise the bits of their business that is not economic. We do have a strong expectation that they'll run even the A1 tariff in an economic way. What the future holds, who knows? But I can guarantee you that if there is further bill reform, it'll be gentle, it'll be coordinated, and it won't leave anybody behind.
Well, I advised previous ministers of energy on these sort of issues, but the fundamental issue is the fixed charge versus the.
And Jai and Kate are doing that for me today.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to highlight our midday saver tariff pilot. That's got an 8-cent middle of the day rate, 55-cent peak rate, and we're piloting that with a variety of customers across the network at the moment. And that really seeks to cut to the heart of that cross subsidy, but also deal with the Matta-Garrett bridge curve effect of system low and incentivise customers to use more of that excess rooftop solar that we have. So the lady in front had a question next, and then I'm looking for the question beyond that. We've got a little bit of time left. Maybe time for one more. Oscar down the end after this.
Hi everyone, my name is Sanjeeva Vista. I'm from Synergy. My question is to Kate. First of all, thank you so much for explaining complex concepts really simply in your presentations, and I always admire that about you. I've got two questions. One is regarding the inverter standard change. Is that part of the DER roadmap? And would there be any potential for curtailing the solar naturally in the future? And my second question is around the EVs. Are we also looking at incentivizing or some sort of stick around tax exemption or things like that when we look at it from the perspective of decarbonisation? Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you. That's kind of you to say. I was almost going to put a jargon warning on my presentation. Fortunately, most of you know what I'm talking about. I'll let the Minister talk on electric vehicles. Sorry. But on, oh goodness, now I've lost my train of thought.
Inverter standards.
The inverter standards. So yes, the uplifted inverter standards was something in the DER roadmap. We worked particularly through Western Power with the Australian Standards Body to contribute to that change, which was changed late last year with a 12-month implementation period. We've now cut short. I think on the question of solar curtailment, it's another really tricky one. We've all seen what's been going on in South Australia. I think the thing that we would say is we are considering options. We know that we've got the system load challenge to deal with. Through our contingency planning and management work, we're continuing to evaluate what tools we might need, particularly those last resort kind of tools, to make sure we can keep the lights on. So it's under consideration, like a whole suite of other things as we continue through this journey.
In respect of EVs, look, I've personally met with Hyundai Auto, I've met with Mercedes, I've met with BMW. They all tell me the same thing, that within 10 years, they will be making 100% electric cars. Whether it's hydrogen electric or battery electric, it doesn't matter, it's still electric. So actually the government doesn't need to incentivise anybody to go electric, because guess what? You're going to be buying electric cars. So the real challenge is not to get you to, not the first 100,000, not the first 1,000 cars, it's the first 100,000 cars. So what happens to the network when there are nobody, you're only driving electric cars? And that's a massive challenge. And Western Power's working on that. Energy Policy WA is working on that. It's a real, it's a massive issue for us. And, you know, we've got to get ready for it because it's going to happen. So it's a bit rich for these car companies to be asked the taxpayers to pay for them not to reduce the price of their cars. Think about this. I mean, there's now a $49,000 car from MG. So you've got these manufacturers, cheapest electric car, $60,000, and they say, rather than us cutting the price by $5,000 to make it more affordable, we want the taxpayers to give us $5,000. So, if we were to subsidise electric cars, that would keep the cost of electric cars higher for longer. So we don't want to do that. We want the manufacturers to tell the truth, which is that they're going 100% electric and they will only be selling electric cars within 10 years. Therefore, it's not about incentive. It's about everybody in this room getting a good price from the manufacturer, and that means they have to push their costs down, and we look forward to them doing that.
Thanks, Minister. Over to you, Oscar, for the final question of the day.
Thank you. Bit of an administrative one, I'm afraid, but with the RCM review, is that going to absorb the current rule change on the relevant level method?
Thanks, Oscar. I was expecting a question on that today, whether it was in the chit chat before or after. Look, that's a really good question, and I anticipate we will have a pretty detailed discussion with the Market Advisory Committee on that in coming months. It's a really genuine question. We know that the rule change panel wasn't able to come to a final decision on its relevant level methodology rule change, which is the one that Oscar's referring to. It's a really complex and quite controversial issue. It will take some time to work through. What we need to think about now as a sector is what's the right process to go through to do that. Do we tackle some of the broader challenges of that methodology in the context of the evolving power system, which the last review didn't really do, or do we finish that and then get on with it? So it's a bit of an open question at the moment. I know what I'd prefer to do, but I'm also really keen to hear what the industry thinks on that one.
Excellent. Thanks, Kate. That takes us to the end of today and our time. I'd really like to thank all of you for attending. Part of the beauty of the WA energy sector is it is small. We can all gather in a room, have at times animated conversations, but there's a lot of passion about the energy transition, and it's been excellent to be able to have these conversations in person today. So I appreciate everyone taking time out of their calendar to come along today. As I mentioned, we have recorded the event and we'll send out a link afterwards. I'd like to ask you all to acknowledge the Minister Bill Johnston and Kate Ryan for their presentation today. There's a heap of food over in the corner there, so don't leave any of it behind. So please enjoy that. And once again, sign up for our email link so you can hear about upcoming events and consultation. Thanks, everyone.